What's up, you guys? I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap, and today we'll be talking about the Billionaire space race. I've been seeing a lot of negative sentiment online about the so-called Billionaire space race. In today's video, I'll give my perspective on that, with of course a focus on the company I know the most about, which is SpaceX. There are a ton of social media posts and even media stories out there that depict what's going on, which is basically the efforts from Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and SpaceX, companies that are run or founded by Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk respectively, as some kind of a competition amongst obscenely wealthy individuals that really kind of spits in the face of the world's larger issues. Now, I know that Jeff Bezos single-handedly funded the Blue Origin company, but even there, it's not been built just to send Jeff into space. This is a company that's been vying for a NASA contract to send U.S. astronauts to the moon, and their mission statement is to build a road into space step by step. So they're known for doing everything very, very slowly and methodically, and not trying to move things too quickly. On their website it says something like smooth is fast. No. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Which can often be the case. Sometimes doing things right the first time is a lot quicker than doing things haphazardly and messily. So sort of a measure thrice, cut once kind of thing. So again, this company is not just about sending Jeff into space. Their mission or their plan is to create sustainable space habitation of some kind. And more recently, they were competing for a contract to send men to the moon. This would be the first time since 1972's Apollo 17 mission. They, of course, lost, and SpaceX was awarded that contract as they're far, far cheaper. As far as Virgin Galactic, which is Richard Branson's company, I don't know all that much about how it's funded, but I do know that, again, this company's purpose isn't for Richard Branson to go out into space. He did do that recently as a PR effort, but the point of the company is space tourism. And so Virgin Atlantic is a company that services terrestrial tourism, right? It's air travel. It's an airline. Virgin Galactic then would kind of serve a similar purpose, except it's tourism to sort of, the borders of space. Nothing like going orbital, but still getting out into space. And finally, we have SpaceX, or Space Exploration Technologies, which is one of the companies that Elon Musk founded at the same time as he founded Tesla, or around the same time. And the goal of SpaceX is to make humanity a multiplanetary species. The reason being that it's a very risky proposition to have all your eggs in one basket or planet when we're looking at a very long time horizon. Just ask the dinosaurs. And with SpaceX, the narrative that it's just an eccentric billionaire trying to get into space for bragging rights, this whole narrative is even more ludicrous than with the other two companies. When Elon Musk started SpaceX, his plan was actually just to send up a little greenhouse type of deal to Mars, and it would be an uncrewed mission, and the greenhouse would kind of deploy and then start growing some plants on Mars. And his hope was that this would generate enough PR and excitement about space travel that things would pick up at NASA, where things have been stagnant for a very long time. That's not to say they haven't done some amazing stuff with landers, and unmanned missions. But in terms of human spaceflight, things have really gone downhill over at NASA, and have been reinvigorated more recently as NASA has looked out to private contractors. Until SpaceX's Dragon program very recently, we hadn't been sending Americans to space, to the International Space Station, since 2011 on U.S. hardware. Astronauts had been having to hitch rides, or pay for rides, on Russian rockets instead. Now, while Elon was trying to figure out how to get this greenhouse project out to Mars, he quickly realized that the way that space travel was at the time, the technology, it was just way, way too expensive for humanity ever to become a multiplanetary species without big leaps in technology. So he set out to do just that. He set out to do that through reusability, because beforehand, really all the rockets that would be launched would just be then basically burnt up when they came back down to Earth, or jettisoned, in, like other parts just jettisoned into space. So you can imagine it's very, very expensive to build a high-tech and humongous rocket spacecraft, basically, and then just not reuse it at all. Now, the space shuttle had some reusability, but refurbishing the space shuttle after each launch was actually very, very expensive and time-taking. So it's nothing like what SpaceX achieves to do with their development craft. So some time ago, Elon Musk sold PayPal for a reported $200 million or so for his share of it. And using that, he invested in SpaceX, and by 2006, he'd invested about $100 million of his own money into SpaceX. So at that time, he certainly wasn't a billionaire, right? And then on top of that, SpaceX very quickly spent a lot of that money. In fact, they had 3 failed attempts to launch their Falcon 1 rocket, and they were able to scrape together just enough parts and money to do a 4th attempt. And what they were trying to do is show that they could launch a rocket into orbit and therefore get a NASA contract to supply the International Space Station. Well, thankfully, they did make that 4th attempt, and they were just on the verge of bankruptcy. But then, with winning the NASA contract, being one of a couple of different companies to win a resupply contract to the National Space Station, that gave them the lifeline they needed and the legitimacy they needed in order to get funding from elsewhere as well, and funding rounds, so that the company was saved and didn't go bankrupt. Since that first successful flight of the Falcon 1, they then developed the very, very capable and highly successful Falcon 9 rocket program, and then drastically improved reusability, beginning with their Block 5 design. Even that design's evolved over time, but if you don't know, and it's pretty amazing, what SpaceX is able to do is to have the first stage, sort of the booster part at the bottom. This part will, send the second stage and the fairing all the way up, into space. And then this first stage, this booster, will come back down and can either land on land or on an automated drone ship in the ocean. And that way they're able to reuse that part. The second stage is expended, but they're able to catch the fairing, which is basically like 2 halves of a lid around whatever the payload is that's going to space. When those separate and fall down, they've been able to attach some parachutes on them, so they splash down gently into the ocean. Then they can recover them, refurbish them, and use them in future missions. So we're recovering not the entire rocket right now with the Falcon 9, but still the first stage and the fairings as well. So it's a big step in reducing costs and moving towards reusability. And now the Starship program that SpaceX is working on is a much larger rocket, because then you have economies of scale and a longer, much lower cost per ton to orbit. But their goal there is to improve reusability so much and reliability that the rocket will essentially be like an aircraft, where it can take off, come back, refuel, and take off again with just a few safety checks. So again, the goal of this project is not to send a rich guy into a trip around the moon, although they are going to do that along with some other people that will come along on the trip with Yusaku Maezawa. It's a good, PR effort, very interesting, gets people excited about space travel, but that's not the point. Part of the point with that was to get some investment into the project. But then again, the point is not to send Elon Musk into space either. He's probably not going to want to risk his life in an endeavor like that until he feels like, a lot of the work that he wants to do for the planet is already done. What it is about getting us to the moon. They've actually won a contract again from NASA in order to send U.S. astronauts to the moon again. And then eventually, of course, also in order to get us over to Mars as well and set up long-term habitats on other planets. All right, so hopefully you can see now that this story of basically 3 really rich dudes, competing for bragging rights over who can get to space the first, isn't really what's going on here. Now, a second part of the criticism that's often been leveled against these efforts has been basically saying that there are a lot of problems here on Earth, such as, say, curing hunger, that could be addressed with the funds that are being spent for space. And I would say that there are three major problems with this kind of thinking. First of all, it's not one or the other. If you look at the total amount of money that humanity is spending on space exploration and travel, even putting satellites up into space and that kind of thing, it is quite minuscule when compared to the amount that countries are spending on their militaries, and really, really tiny, even just if you look at the US budget for NASA versus its budget for things like, I don't know, our spending on healthcare as a country as a share of GDP, or definitely the military here in the US, and then other programs as well. The point being that there are plenty of resources out there, and we could divert some of those resources to curing these ills for the world. It's just we haven't done that. Hunger, for instance, isn't a resource problem. There is not a global shortage of food. It's just that the food isn't going to the places where it is needed the most. It's a distribution problem. In fact, in a lot of the places, the developed countries where there's an abundance of food, it's so abundant that there's a whole heck of a lot that is going to waste. The second flaw in this kind of thinking of saying, wow, these billionaires shouldn't spend money on space, they should be spending money on X problem here in the world, is sustainability. So let's imagine for a moment that Elon Musk, with the billions of dollars in cash that he doesn't have, by the way, decided to divert huge amounts of resources into feeding everyone, all the hungry people on the planet. You might be able to do that for a time, but it wouldn't be a sustainable fix. It wouldn't fix the root of the problem. All it would do is, it would be a band-aid solution. It would help for a time until he ran out of money. By contrast, the $100 million that Elon invested in SpaceX is much, much more than sustainable. The company now accounts for the lion's share of payload to orbit per year and is valued at over $70 billion. Soon, it's going to be bringing broadband internet to remote locations across the globe through its Starlink program, and as mentioned before, could eventually help us set up bases on the moon and on Mars. And all this is being done by generating revenues, providing goods and services, mostly launch services right now, and then coming up internet services as well. Actually saying that, I think they have already tens of thousands of subscribers to the Starlink program. It's still in beta, but it will be growing fairly quickly. Anyway, they're meeting all of these goals through providing, again, these services that generate revenues and are sustainable. And finally, I'd say that the idea that Elon Musk is some sort of Scrooge McDuck sitting on, piles of cash is grossly inaccurate. He's wealthy because the shares that he owns in the companies that he founded are worth quite a lot now, right? His interest in SpaceX and in Tesla are worth quite a bit, and then he's also started smaller ventures, but they're growing, like the Boring Company and Neuralink. And all these companies, by the way, are aimed at curing an ill that's going on in the world, right? With Tesla, it's about sustainable energy, and it's actually morphing into also helping to prevent us from having a bad outcome related to artificial intelligence. And then the Boring Company is about relieving congestion, and also these tunnels could be a useful way to provide transportation on Mars or on the moon, right? Then Neuralink could help paraplegics and really do help a lot of other people that have any kind of issues where the brain can't send signals to parts of the body. So there's a whole host of medical conditions that could help. And then it can also help with the brain-machine interface as well. But Elon has basically had a history of just plowing whatever he makes back into his companies. So he started with kind of an online Yellow Pages company with his brother called Zip2. This was sold to Compaq for, I think he netted about $22 million personally. Then he used that money to set up X.com, which later merged with Coinfinity. Yes, Confinity. And that merged company ended up becoming PayPal. Then again, he sold the PayPal company for about, reportedly $200 million, and then used that money in order to set up both Tesla and SpaceX, and the rest is history, although both companies came very close to bankruptcy some years ago. Anyway, the point is that Elon doesn't have giant piles of cash sitting around somewhere. In fact, he doesn't own a bunch of houses. In fact, he's sold all of his properties now. I'm not saying that he doesn't have a cushy lifestyle, right? But he definitely he's not doing all of those billionaire type things that people like to think about. So if nothing else, I hope this video has at least given you some pause when you see this argument about billionaires, and you can see that the situation isn't so clear-cut. It's those kinds of narratives are powerful because they're kind of catchy, and especially these days there's sort of this eat the rich kind of angst out there, I think. And don't get me wrong, I can absolutely understand the case that many people are not seeing their situations improve nearly as much as a small group of individuals on this planet. And this is something that we saw back in the Gilded Age, and we're seeing these concentrations of wealth happen more recently, and then that's begotten a lot of sort of regulatory capture as well, which is not good at all. So there are all these problems out there, and what I'm trying to say is, while that's true that that's going on, and that it's easy to sort of take this situation with Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin and SpaceX and try to cast it in that narrative, but I really don't think it fits. Right? I really don't think that that fits at all. And the last thing I'd like to say here is that there's something that's really exciting about space travel. We used to have this idea of the American West, right? Just exploration, and now space is really the next frontier. The final frontier, to quote a television show, but it is really the next frontier. And I think there's something just exciting about the prospect of venturing out into the stars. My hope is that we can learn to do that, to venture out amongst those stars, but then also that we can learn to have a sustainable society, so that we don't simply kick the can down the road and have, say, the situation here on Earth cripple and fall apart, and then just repeat the same mistakes in all of our future colonies. And I sincerely believe that we could do that. We absolutely could do that, and I hope that we do. With that, I'll say thank you for watching. If you liked the video, do please hit the like button and consider subscribing. It'd really help out the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.